also for scheduling me at this time when, for me, the jet lag is very fine. It's 4 o'clock. I'm totally cool. At 2 p.m. it would have been very difficult. So what I'm trying to do today is to address the question of the relationship between mobility and prison. And I will rely on the Belgian Prison Act, which is, for the first time in Belgian history, a law about prison. Till 2005, there were only administrative instructions, but no law. So this law was very ambitious, with long preparatory documents by a commission with specialists and scientists and so on. Its rules, visits, disciplinary procedures, control of the institution, isolation or community regime, and so on and so on. So it's a very broad law about whatever happens inside prison. And a great deal of it is not yet in force, which is certainly not something innocent, I would say. But back to classical prison. What is the relationship between prison and mobility in a classical model? I would say it's a painful immobilization model. Suppression of the liberty to circulate, that's the very basis. Specific buildings, isolated and compartmentalized, this is very important. People are isolated from the outside, but on the inside they are isolated from each other. They are also forbidden to speak in certain regimes, so it's a silence rule, a very monastic system. The inmates are also categorized, so the compartmentalization is awful, is valid physically, but also, so to say, socially, between different categories of inmates. There is a physical and a social isolation, which is very important because visits are very difficult, contacts with the outside are prohibited, and so on. And also there's a time which is an ever-recurring routine for a very defined stretch of time. So there is no flexibility in the way time flows in prison. So there's a physical and non-physical immobilization in physical and non-physical spaces, and that's for me very important to be aware that prison is not only a physical space, it's also a social space, it's an institution, and the immobilization is not only physical but also social, for instance. It's a mirror, in my view, it's a mirror of society. This immobilization happens in a society of anchorages. It's a society which fears nomadism, internationalism, cosmopolitanism, and so on. So everyone is demanded to have roots, to have anchorages. And when people move from a place to another, they are asked to settle somewhere. A good example of this is the movements of the workers in the 19th century. In Belgium, they had to have a book with them, and they could only move if they had the proof that they were going in another place where a job was waiting for them. So there was a whole system of controlling space, and people without roots and without anchorage were suspicious. For me, this corresponds to a social construction of space-time, which I call the limit form. In this vision, space is seen as a set of circumscription, as we could see in a nation-state model. You see, every space is defined by a border, which is very precisely designed, and inside this border there can be sub-borders, like departments, province, communes, towns, and so on. So it's a system of structuring the space which relies on the idea of border. And this is socially also valid. There are borders between different statutes inside the society, between genders, between different jobs, functions inside the factories, and so on. Time is made of stasis and ruptures. So these are eras of stabilities, and suddenly there's a change, a revolution, a new discovery, something that is seen as changing everything. Maybe the infinite search for the moment of the collapse of the Roman Empire is a good vision of how people saw time at this time. They were searching for the day the Roman Empire collapsed. Today, I can say that the vision of time is no longer this one. In classical prison, 4 imperatives towards the inmates. To function, the prisoner must be a well-functioning entity in a mechanically conceived institution. It's the same as in a factory. Application of orders and treatment, so it means compliance and discipline, as Foucault said. But also incorporation. The management of the prison relies on the management of population in which inmates are incorporated. It's the idea of biopower from Foucault. Stabilization is the imperative of location or relocation of the inmate in the space he belongs to. The aim of prison is to get him back at the good place, at his place in society. I'll try now to sketch rapidly a new vision of prison on the basis of the parliamentary document, the preparatory document of the Prison Act. There's a new challenge. The legitimacy of prison has always been problematic in a democratic state. But now we see that in the documents, the problem of prison is no longer the liberty deprivation, but the autonomy loss of the inmates. We move from the rights, being deprived from a right, the right to move, to the skills, being deprived of the skill to adapt, to be active, to be autonomous in a society. And this is the key problem of prison in this vision of prison. And then immobilization, which was the solution, is now the problem. It's seen as the problem. The objective, the aim is to make prison as normal as can be. So the main objective set to prison is its normalization, being just as the normal society. It requires opening and decompartmentalization, so it requires to make from prison a social place, a place where social relationships can occur. There's a strong emphasis on promotion of participation. Furthermore, there is no more predetermined goals for imprisonment. The only general goal is the limitation of detrimental effects of imprisonment. The rest, they say, there is no goal in prison. Some goals can be pursued at the occasion of imprisonment, but for the rest, it's the responsibility of the inmate himself to determine his own, the sense of his own imprisonment, because it's his penalty, not ours. So there's a total shift in the vision of prison. Initiative and restoration of autonomy are very important in this vision. In my paper, which is here at your disposal, you'll see abstracts from the parliamentary documents, but I couldn't read them now. But I can say that in my vision, there are 4 new imperatives. Activity. Prison is no more wasted time. It's no question of just sitting in your cell and waiting for the time to flow. You must be active, make something. Make what? Not obey the orders, but activation. You must be at the principle of your own activity. You must make a project of your own incarceration. A key element in this vision is the detention plan. When an inmate comes into the prison, he is asked to make a plan. So to say what he intends to do, what his projects are for the time he will spend in prison. This is very different from the idea of taking someone, putting him in a cell and let him rot for 10 years. So there's a real shift here. Participation is very important because what people are required to do is to build projects with partners, external partners, the victim, services that could help for learning or finding a job and so on. But all these are projects. So there is no orders, no necessities. There are services which are offered to the inmates, and it's their responsibility to choose amongst them and to build projects. Adaptation is a key issue because inside the prison, the prisoners are asked to adapt to the offers they have, and also the aim is that they go out as flexible as possible to be autonomous in the free society and to be able to live in the free society. Because living in the free society is not a question of being the right man at the right place, but of being someone flexible and able to make projects and to lead his life in an autonomous way. So we have totally shifted from the idea of discipline to the idea of initiative and autonomy. This takes place for me in a broader frame, which I call the mobilitarian ideology, which relies on a new vision of space-time, a new conception, a new social construction of space-time. Time is now seen, I think, as a flow, something eroding everything constantly. So it's not a question of stasis and ruptures. It's a question of constant changes. But if things constantly change, you cannot keep a border. A border is meant to last for decades or centuries. In this vision, things are always moving. So the space cannot be read through the category of border, but it must be structured by the idea of punctuated space. This is the attraction of different nodes in the net. For instance, for prison, there is no clear distinction between free society and prison, because you can be in so many ways in relationships between free society and prison that there is no prison in itself and free society in itself. When you are with an electronic tag, you are not really free, but you are not inside prison. But in case of problem, you will get very quickly into the prison. So you are in this carceral continuum, which you cannot describe with the idea of border. In this context, if everything is always moving, mobility is impossible to avoid. It's immobility that's impossible. And so in this context, if you want to be a good person, someone which is adapted to the situation, you also must be mobile. And in this context, mobility becomes an imperative. And here we find back the four imperatives of activity, activation, participation, and adaptation, which we could apply to family, social care, prison, learning, factories, and so on. I could develop, but I don't have time, and I always got a reminder. So I think, in my vision, in this new Prison Act, prison is seen as a mobility test, a series of mobility tests, more than punitive immobilization. Because punitive immobilization has no sense in a flow-form time-space. So in prison, inside prison, prisoners are asked to show they are able to cope with the imperatives of the mobilitarian ideology. And the more they can cope with them, the more they will have good conditions of life, possibilities to go out, to get services, and so on. The paradox for sure is that these mobility tests happen in an institution that put them in jail. So there is a complex relationship between the immobilization and the will to make them pass through mobility tests. Is this just a discourse? I think that in a large way, it is just a discourse. It is just an attempt to once more legitimize an institution that we cannot imagine to suppress, but we cannot see how to justify. So this works because the MPs didn't say this is totally absurd, what are you talking about, and so on. So it worked. But the walls will resist. The institution also will resist. The law didn't come into force in total, and it's also because there's an inside culture of immobilization that resists. So I don't say that prison is now open and everything's fine and the new model is there. I think it's a very complex relationship between a discourse and an institution. And in this context, what I think mobilitarian ideology is useful for is to show that this new prison is not something strange. It's something logical when we look at the way we conceive now families, factories, and so on, even democracy and political systems. I thank you.